Good morning. We're going to be reading chapter 34 of Black Beauty. So yesterday in your reading, you heard about Black Beauty's new owner, Jerry Barker. So what do you think of Jerry Barker? He's a very kind man. He is good to Black Beauty in every way, wanting Black Beauty to be comfortable and happy. Now, there was another horse mentioned that is owned by Jerry Barker. Do you remember what his name was? Captain, if you said that correct. So Captain is the other horse that Jerry Barker has. We know that that Captain was an old war horse, very noble, very old. That's why he's become a cab horse at this time. But in every other way, he is an excellent horse of high standings. So we're going to find out more about what his life was like during the Crimean War. I'm going to present my screen. If you have your book to follow along, you are welcome to do that. Chapter 35. Or sorry, 34. Okay. So, Captain had been broken in and trained for an army horse. His first owner was an officer of cavalry. Now, cavalry is a unit of the military that no longer exists, but they rode on horses. Okay, it actually comes from a Latin word, caballus, which means horse. Okay, so cavalry comes from that word horse. It is part of the military. Going out to the Crimean War. Now, the Crimean War was fought between Russia and the United Kingdom, which is where we're reading about right now, were part of this war as well. So he said he quite enjoyed the training with all the other horses, trotting together, turning together, just like soldiers have to learn a specific way of doing things. The horses that were carrying the soldiers did too. Trotting together, turning together, to the right hand or to the left, halting at the word of command, or dashing forward at full speed at the sound of the trumpet or signal of the officer. He was, meaning Captain, when young, a dark dappled iron gray, and considered very handsome. His master, a young high-spirited gentleman, was very fond of him, and treated him from the first with the greatest care and kindness. He told me he thought the life of an army horse was very pleasant. But when it came to being sent abroad over the sea in a great ship, he almost changed his mind. That part of it, said he, was dreadful. Of course, we could not walk off the land into the ship, so they were obliged to put strong straps under our bodies, and then we were lifted off our legs in spite of our struggles, and were swung through the air over the water to the deck of the great vessel. There we were placed in small, close stalls. Sadly, this is the case for a lot of people that were shipped from one place to the other, like slaves, sadly, when they were brought over to America, many of them. They had to sleep in very tight quarters for possibly months. That's how long it took to travel across the ocean. And never for a long time saw the sky or were able to stretch our legs. The ship sometimes rolled about in high winds, and we were knocked about and felt bad enough. However, at last it came to an end, and we were hauled up and swung over again to the land, and we were very, very glad. And we snorted and made for joy when we once more felt firm ground under our feet. So it was a trying time, but it was worth it. Now they're back on land. We soon found that the country we had come to was very different from our own, and that we had many hardships to endure besides the fighting. But many of the men were so fond of their horses that they did everything they could to make them comfortable in spite of snow, wet, and all things out of order. What about the fighting? Said I. Black Beauty is asking this. Was not that worse than anything else? Well, said he, I hardly know. We always like to hear the trumpet sound and to be called out, and we're impatient to start off. We see this from Black Beauty too, that he wants to work. He is eager to go even though he does want moments of rest when he really needs it. Though sometimes we had to stand for hours waiting for the word of command. And when the word was given, we used to spring forward as gaily and eagerly as if there were no cannonballs, bayonets, or bullets. So in some ways, they kind of forgot that there was a war going on, and they just focused on riding, because horses don't understand what war is, even though they might be scared by the sounds of the cannonballs, and it's possible that they would get injured. Now, I believe so long as we felt our rider firm in the saddle and his hand steady on the bridle, not one of us gave way to fear, not even when the terrible bombshells swirled through the air and burst into 1,000 pieces. So what gave him the peace and the courage to keep going? As long as he felt his rider on his back. Now I, with my noble master, went into many actions together without a wound. And though I saw horses shot down with bullets, pierced through with lances, which are like spears, and gashed with fearful saber cuts, though we left them dead on the field or dying in the agony of their wounds, I don't think I feared for myself. My master's cheery voice, as he encouraged his men, made me feel as if he and I could not be killed. I had such perfect trust in him that while he was guiding me, I was ready to charge up to the very cannon's mouth. Not that he would truly go up to the cannon itself, but he felt fearless because of his rider. I saw many brave men cut down, many fall mortally wounded from their saddles. I had heard the cries and groans of the dying. I had cantered over ground slippery with blood, and frequently had to turn aside to avoid trampling on wounded man or horse. But until one dreadful day, I had never felt terror. That day I shall never forget. Here, old Captain paused for a while and drew a long breath. I waited, and he went on. It was one autumn morning, and as usual, an hour before daybreak, our cavalry had turned out, ready caparisoned for the day's work, whether it might be fighting or waiting. The men stood by their horses waiting, ready for orders. As the light increased, there seemed to be some excitement among the officers. And before the day was well begun, we heard the firing of the enemy's guns. Then one of the officers rode up and gave the word for the men to mount. And in a second, every man was in his saddle, and every horse stood expecting the touch of the rein or the pressure of his rider's heels, all animated, all eager. But still, we had been trained so well that, except by the champing of our bits and the restive tossing of our heads from time to time, it could not be said that we stirred at all. My dear master and I were at the head of the line, and as all sat motionless and watchful, he took a little stray lock of my mane, which had turned over on the wrong side, laid it over on the right, and smoothed it down with his hand. Then, patting my neck, he said, "We shall have a day of it today, Bayard, my beauty." So it sounds like he knows that there could be a lot of people who die in this battle. But we'll do our duty as we have done. That shows amazing courage, doesn't it? He knows that there is a strong chance that they might die in this battle, but he is continuing on anyway for the pride of his country. He stroked my neck that morning more, I think, than he had ever done before. Quietly on and on, as if he were thinking of something else. I loved to feel his hand on my neck, and arched my crest proudly and happily. I stood very still, for I knew all his moods, and when he liked me to be quiet, and when gay or happy. I cannot tell all that happened on that day, but I will tell of the last charge that we made together. It was across a valley, right in front of the enemy's cannon. By this time, we were well used to the roar of heavy guns, the rattle of musket fire, and the flying of shot near us. But never had I been under such a fire as we rode through on that day. From the right, from the left, and from the front, shot and shell poured in upon us. Many a brave man went down. Many a horse fell, flinging his rider to the earth. Many a horse without a rider ran wildly out of the ranks. Then, terrified at being alone with no hand to guide him, came pressing him in among his old companions to gallop with them to the charge. Fearful as it was, no one stopped. No one turned back. Every moment the ranks were thinned, and more people are falling and dying. But as our comrades fell, we closed in to keep them together. And instead of being shaken or staggered in our pace, our gallop became faster and faster as we neared the cannon. My master, my dear master, was cheering on his comrades with his right hand arm raised on high when one of the balls whizzing close to my head struck him. I felt him stagger with the shock, though he uttered no cry. I tried to check my speed, but the sword, and check his speed means kind of stop, but the sword dropped from his right hand, the rein fell loose from the left, and the sinking backward from the saddle, he fell to the earth. The other riders swept past us, and by the force of their charge, I was driven from the spot. I wanted to keep my place by his side and not leave him under that rush of horses. He's thinking maybe he's still alive, and what if the horses trample him? But it was in vain, and now without a master or a friend, I was alone on that great slaughter ground. Then fear took hold on me, and I trembled as I had never trembled before. And I too, as I had seen other horses do, tried to join in the ranks and gallop with them. But I was beaten off by the swords of the soldiers. Just then, a soldier whose horse had been killed under him caught at my bridle and mounted me. So he lost his horse. Well, Captain has lost his rider, so they teamed up. And with this new master, I was again going forward. But our gallant company was cruelly overpowered, and those who remained alive after the fierce fight for the guns came galloping back over the same ground. Some of the horses had been so badly wounded that they could scarcely move from the loss of blood. Other noble creatures were trying on 3 legs to drag themselves along, and others were struggling to rise on their 4 feet when their hind legs had been shattered by shot. After the battle, the wounded men were brought in and the dead were buried. What about the wounded horses? I said. Were they left to die? No, the army farriers, those are the ones who helped with the horses, especially their hooves, went over the field with their pistols and shot all that were ruined. So all of those horses, even if they were living, they were shot if they had any type of injury. Some had only slight wounds, were brought back and attended to, but the greater part of the noble, willing creatures that went out that morning never came back. So sad. But they were doing that to honor their riders and to follow their orders. And those courageous riders were doing it to save possibly many lives that would otherwise have been killed. In our stables, there was only about 1 in 4 that returned. I never saw my dear master again. I believe he fell dead from the saddle. I never loved any other master so well. I went into many other engagements, but was only once wounded, and then not seriously. And when the war was over, I came back again to England, as sound and strong as when I went out. I said, I've heard people talk about war as if it was a very fine thing. Ah, said he, I should think they never saw it. No doubt it is very fine when there is no enemy, when it is just exercise and parade and sham fight. Yes, it is very fine then. But when thousands of good, brave men and horses are killed or crippled for life, it has a very different look. And I would say that's very true, that it's a very sad thing for any country to have to fight in war. Now, we should want to honor the people who have fought because it's a very selfless thing for them to do. that they are risking their life for the sake of for us and our country and whatever else they're fighting for. But it's not a grand thing. It's really sad. All of these people who either die or they're injured and really suffer after they come back. Do you know what they fought about? Said I. No, he said. That is more than a horse can understand. But the enemy must have been awfully wicked people if it was right to go all that way over the sea just on the purpose to kill them. So he's saying it better be worth it. So that is the end of our chapter, hearing about what it was like for horses at wartime, specifically that Crimean War, but in general, what it might be like for horses that were fighting in the cavalry unit when that was still around. Now we don't have a cavalry unit. There are people who might be riding tanks, something like that, but not horses. So that's the end of the chapter. Please answer the questions to go along with this video, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.